Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome to the first ever no game scheduled UFC companion episode. We're going to come up with a new name. We were kind of just made this on the fly, and it's something I've wanted to do for a long time now. I've had a lot of people tell me, John, you got to get into the UFC world. And the problem is I haven't had anybody to do it with, but finally we found somebody. This man has not missed a UFC fight in 3 years. He's the person who got me into UFC. I still don't know that much, and from what I do know is solely from him, and that is No Game Schedule's lead contributor for UFC. That is Drew Johnson. Drew, thank you so much for joining me today. Really quickly here, I know you love UFC. I guess I should say thank you for getting me into UFC, but then again, there's been several fights that have bored me to death, and I blame you for that.
Absolutely, John. Thank you. Thank you for the invite. I'm happy to be here.
So UFC 312, this video will be coming out Saturday morning. So tomorrow morning at the time of recording this on Friday. And so we got a couple of hours and we got a couple of fights. There are 2 title fights tonight and a lot of prelims and early prelims and that you just said that are just boring and really don't matter at all.
I wouldn't say boring, but I'm not really as excited for them as I am for the 2 title fights. You know, everybody loves title fights, but I think these 2 specifically people have been waiting for a really long time.
If you have been living under a rock and you are somehow watching this video and this is how you find out about what's happening in UFC, first of all, that's sensational. Dricus Du Plessis. Drew, you're going to help me on the pronunciations. I know you know him.
Dricus Du Plessis. Most people just call him DDP.
So DDP is taking on Sean Strickland in the middleweight title fight. Duplessis currently owns it. Strickland, correct me if I'm wrong, Strickland formerly had it and they lost it, right?
Yeah, so Strickland beat Izzy Adesanya. One of the biggest upsets in UFC history, actually. I think it was number 7 on the list. And then he lost the belt to Dricus in January of 24. So this is actually a rematch. A lot of people think Strickland won that fight, myself included. I think to really, win the belt, you have to beat the champ, and I don't really think Dricus did, even though I'm a Dricus fan. It did. It went to decision in Canada, which I don't know if you know. A lot of people in Canada do not like Sean Strickland. It was split decision. Dricus won. I don't think Dricus won that fight. I think Strickland just came out and absolutely dominated him in 3 of the 5 rounds, and I guess one of the judges just didn't see it that way.
We'll get to that fight in a little bit. And the women's strawweight, which is it below or above lightweight?
That's gonna be 115. That's gonna be your smallest women's weight class.
Okay. So Weili Zhang and Tatiana Suarez, who is 11-0 coming into this match. That is also a title fight. Zhang has that one as well. I've seen actually a surprising amount of Zhang fights. She's a killer, man. She is an absolute killer.
She is. I think she's 25-3. She lost her pro debut in some sort of Asian UFC, and she lost 2 fights to Rose. She got knocked out in the first round of their first meeting, and then lost a split decision. Which, as again, I think Weili won in the rematch with Rose, but it shows that Weili's beatable, and I think Tatiana's going to pull this one out, maybe even inside the distance.
Yeah, this is going to be a really good fight as well. This one will happen prior to the Strickland fight. They always have the women fight first. The other 3 cards fights on the main card, it can be Justin Tafa versus Talson. Filling out that one. Last name.
Talson Teixeira.
Teixeira. Okay, you got Jimmy Crute. You know what? Here's what we're going to do. I'm going to just say all the names, and then you can come in on the back end and correct me if I'm absolutely butchering them or not. We got Jimmy Crute.
Mm-hmm.
We're good there. Taking on Rodolfo Bellato. Jake Matthews taking on Francisco Prado. Yeah, the last 4 were pretty easy to say. Is there anybody, let me see here, in the preliminary card that I recognize off the top of my head? Some of them were canceled. That's unfortunate. And I don't know anybody in early prelims. So we'll just stick on the main card for now. Which of these fights that are not, is there any of the fights that aren't the titles that you want to talk about?
Yeah, absolutely. I think Jake Matthews versus Francisco Prado is going to be an absolute banger of a fight. Jake Matthews is just he's fast. He's really big for a welterweight, and he hits really hard. He's going to throw some bombs, and Prado's not a bum either. I can see Prado pulling out this fight as almost a 2-1 dog, but I think Jake Matthews is just almost on another level. I think he's maybe 1 win away from getting a crack in the top 15. Really good all-around fighter from Australia. Yeah, they're 2 good fighters. But I think Matthews is probably going to pull it out. Probably not inside the distance. Probably a unanimous decision, but I think Matthews is going to win that fight.
Which one's the Australian? Is it Matthews or is it Prado?
Jake Matthews.
Matthews. I think. Listen, this fight's taking place in Australia. When was the last time it was in? Do you know?
It would have been
down under.
9/9/23. That would have been when Strickland beat Izzy in the title fight. Was the last that was in Australia.
That was in Australia. Oh wow, that was a long time ago. Jesus. Time flies, man. Time flies. So I'm going to give the home.
Speaking of time flies, before you get into that, speaking of time flies, one of the first UFC events that was in Sydney was Rousey versus Holly Holm, and I did watch that fight. That was one of the first UFC fights that I watched. Absolute shocking upset.
Was that the one? Yeah, I would say that was when Ronda Rousey got her just ass beat.
She got knocked out with that head kick from Holly, out cold, and then she never really recovered from that.
Yeah, that's the fall off in UFC is truly remarkable. There's nothing else like it in sports. I have a question for you after we get to this main card that I got to ask about that. Let's go up to the light heavyweight, Jimmy Crute versus Rodolfo Bellato. Jimmy Crute coming in 12-4-1, Bellato coming in 12-2. Anything you got to say about this one?
Yeah, Jimmy Crute's been out for a while with a broken leg. If I'm not mistaken, I think this is his first fight back since his injury. Looks like, yeah, it was. He lost to Menafield. He got submitted in July of 23. I think he had some sort of leg injury, if I'm not mistaken. Been a decent layoff for him, but
do you know
he's a pretty good fighter.
Obviously, you got to work both sides, but fighters have a strong leg versus a non-strong leg. Do you know if it was his kicking leg or his plant leg that got injured? Because I mean, listen. I'll tell you what. Like from a soccer player standpoint, I broke my leg when I was in high school, and like it just wasn't the same after that. I would never. Psychologically, I could never play the same because I was afraid to get that leg injured, and that is amplified in the UFC.
Sorry, I'm mistaken. It was not that. It was not that fight. That was one. It was a. The fight I'm thinking of was August 2021. He's only had 2 fights since then, but it was called foot drop. Almost the same thing that happened with Sean O'Malley, where he got kicked in the back of the knee and the nerve in his foot just went and he couldn't walk. It's almost like your leg just goes numb. But it took him a while to come back from that.
At one point, right? Adesanya had that happen to him.
Yeah, he recovered and wound up winning that fight. But yeah, that did happen to Adesanya.
Let's go to the Tafa fight. Oh, sorry, you never gave it. You said Crute wins this one. Is that what you said?
I don't know. I think it's kind of a toss-up. I think I'm going to give it to Bellato just because I think he's fresher. He's a little bit bigger. He's 6'3" and has about a 2-inch reach advantage. I think he's just a little bit bigger. He's also coming off a win too, so that's going to definitely play in as well. He beat Io Portiera. That was his UFC debut. But it was a nasty second round knockout. I think Bellato is going to be one of those guys to be a problem in the next couple of years. I think Bellato is going to win this fight.
All right, good to see. Let's go to the Tafa fight. Tafa coming in 7-4-1, no contest as well. And Turexia is 7-0 undefeated so far in the heavyweight division. Both these guys are pretty young. I mean, you look at some of the other fighters on this main card, and you're talking about people who have double digits into the 30 fights. These guys are first of all barely into double digits, and Turexia has only got 7 fights in. Are these two up and comers? Why are these guys so new?
They're both up and comers. Just Tafa hasn't really had that good of a UFC record. His brother Junior Tafa is also in the UFC. He's a heavyweight. They look surprisingly similar. But yeah, Tafa is, I think he's 1-2 in the UFC if I'm not mistaken. Sorry, he's 3-2-1 in the UFC. I'm thinking of his brother. Yeah, he's a little bit of an up and comer. I mean, these heavyweight guys, they don't fight much.
He's 3-2. So you say he's 3-2-1 in the UFC, right? And his record is 7-4-1.
Mm-hmm.
What are the other fights? Where else is he fighting? Is that UFC Fight Night? Is that Ultimate Warrior? Where else is he getting those things on his record from?
I'm not too sure. I don't really follow a lot of the heavyweights because they're not as active as some of the other divisions because they're bigger guys. They just throw bombs.
They're fat,
so they don't fight as much. So it's kind of hard to keep up with a division where you have guys maybe only fighting once or twice a year as opposed to 3 or 4. So when you have guys that aren't as active, it's a lot harder to keep up with the division.
All right, who are you taking for this heavyweight fight?
Give me the dog. I'll take Justin Tafa.
Okay. Let's move on to the women's strawweight. Now we can talk into these a little bit more. We already talked about Suarez just a little bit this fight.
Mm-hmm.
So Zhang Li's coming in 25-3, Tatiana Suarez 11-0. We just talked about up-and-comers. So this is very much a fight of a hard-earned veteran, someone who has been in the ring for a couple of years now, versus someone who is, 11 wins and 0 losses, that's nothing to cough at, but you compare the two records, and very much so you are the rookie when it comes to this situation.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, the title defender is always going to be the favorite. So what do you think Suarez is going to have to do in this fight if she wants to take that belt?
I'm going to shock you a little bit, John. Surprisingly, as of this recording, Wei Li is not the favorite. She's a plus 100 even money dog. Suarez is actually a slight favorite over Wei Li. A little bit about Tatiana is that she's 11-0 in the UFC. She won the Ultimate Fighter in 2016. But before that, she was actually an Olympic trial wrestler. Going to probably compete for the United States, but she broke her neck in training. And when they did the MRI on her broken neck, they found out she had thyroid cancer. So they took her thyroid out. So then she realizes, okay, I can't do wrestling anymore. So then she trains and wins 3 fights and goes on the Ultimate Fighter. She's the first draft pick on Claudia Gadelia's team, winds up winning the whole show and gets a contract. She rattles off 4 wins and then tweaks her neck. And then she has a 44-month layoff where she has to get her neck right. And then in training, everything in her knee goes. She dislocates her knee, tears her ACL, MCL, PCL, and then her meniscus, and is out. And then for that whole 44 months, she comes back and she subs a girl in the division up that's a pretty good fighter. And then her last fight in August of 2023, she subbed Jessica Andrade. She's another former champ. So this girl's record's no joke. She's good.
This girl, dude, there's people who have been to war who've had less injuries than that.
Yeah, speaking of war, she actually saw a military doctor about her knee because they said her knee injury from training was closer to like a motorcycle accident or a war injury than like an athletic injury. So it's crazy. She's got a documentary on HBO. I think everybody, even if you're not an MMA fan, should watch that documentary because it's not an MMA documentary. It's a life story. And I think it's probably one of the best documentaries I've seen in a while.
I think that's one of the things that has really attracted me to the UFC, and it's something that I've learned from you, and that's that the reason everyone likes UFC is because everybody has a story, right? There is, unless your name's Chael Sonnen, there is no like super privileged people who've like had a really easy life in the UFC. Everyone's had a difficult life. Everyone's dealt with struggle. And I think that relates to a lot of people and why the target demographic for UFC is really just like, it's not meant for like the upper class. It's truly is it. UFC, every single area of fighting is supposed to be the working man's game. And boxing's died over the last couple of years. I know it's like they're talking it's going to make a comeback, but I think that's why UFC's rise to fame has been so prevalent because everyone has something they can relate to.
Yeah, absolutely. I really like watching UFC because like not only do you see the awesome fights, but you have to look more into like the people in the ring. Their stories outside of it almost matter more than their stories in the ring. That's only 15 minutes every 5 months when look at how many other days of the year you're spent outside of the ring.
Yeah. A 15-minute fight, you got to train, 45,000 minutes. You got to dedicate your entire life to just 15 minutes. And listen, man, we've seen the thing that got me into the UFC was, McGregor knocking out, Jose Aldo in 13 seconds. You spend all this time, all these months preparing, and it goes out like that. I think it's one of the most alluring things. Let's go back to the strawweight fight. So you said Suarez is the favorite, but obviously
yes.
Zhang is the more seasoned veteran here. Is this going to be? I've seen Zhang fights. I know she's a grappler. She likes to get on the ground. Not a striker. I don't know what Suarez provides, but coming from a wrestling background, I'm sure she's the same way. Is this going to be on a mat, or is this going to be a fist fight?
I'm not sure. I think Tatiana has probably the best wrestling in all of women's MMA right now. I don't really think there's anybody that's going to be able to wrestle with her. Zhang's background is definitely Muay Thai. That's what she did. She does in a lot of her fights, but she's just so fit and dominant. She can wrestle, but I don't see this fight willingly going to the mat for Wei Li. I think she's going to try to keep it on the feet. She's got about a 3-inch reach disadvantage. She's going to have to keep Suarez. She's going to have to stay in real close and use her knees and her jabs and her strikes and really just pepper Suarez with shots and honestly put her away early because if this fight goes the distance, I don't see Wei Li winning this fight.
So Wei Li doesn't have the height advantage and also she doesn't really have the ground advantage. That's so is that why Suarez is favorited right now?
I think people are favoring Suarez just because her story's crazy, and I think that her wrestling is just absolutely next level. Like there's nobody in the UFC that can wrestle with her. Nobody's taken her down, and she's got about a 77% takedown success rate. So nobody can really wrestle with her willingly. I mean, to really, and her jiu-jitsu is so good because she's got a jiu-jitsu black belt. You're not going to submit her on the ground. You have to knock this girl out to beat her, and nobody's figured out that puzzle. I mean, 11 people have tried and 11 people have failed. I just don't see Weili winning this fight unless she knocks out Suarez in like some shocking fashion and probably round 1 or 2.
So you going with the favorite? I know you're. I know. Listen, I know you. I've known you long enough. I know you're putting out some. You're putting out DraftKings or Barstool. You're putting some bets on these fights. Are you taking Suarez?
I think I'm going to take Suarez probably inside the distance. I think Suarez is going to be the second person to ever finish Weili, and I think that it's going to be I don't know if it's going to be a knockout, if it's going to be a submission. I just see her probably submitting Weili in round 3 or 4.
All right. There you have it, women's strawweight fight. Let's go to the main event, men's middleweight, the Strickland fight, as everyone is referring to it as. This is a rematch, as we alluded to earlier. Strickland 29-6, Duplessis 22-2. Strickland's one of my favorite guys in the UFC in all of fighting. I think we talked about stories. I like his story more than everybody, and I can really relate to it. If you have not watched the Sean Strickland on Theo Von's podcast, that is a must watch for. Not even if you're a fan of fighting, if you're just a fan of stories, that's something you got to watch. Strickland, however, he's won in interesting ways. He's lost in even more interesting ways, and this might be an interesting fight. What do you think about this, Drew?
I don't know. I like Strickland. I like Dricus, but looking at both of their last fights, look what Dricus did to Adesanya with that 4th round submission. Buddy's done that to him. I mean, Dricus fought his entire career up until the Robert Whittaker fight, not being able to breathe through his nose. He had to have rhinoplasty done on his nose, and as soon as he got that done against Robert Whittaker, I think that was fight in July of 2023, that was a absolute new breed of Dricus. That he's big. He's got a good reach. He's got long legs. I mean, you talk about a guy that's just an absolute. You can't call him a striker or a grappler. He's an MMA fighter. He's got background in judo, wrestling. He's got a kickboxing background. He's got amazing cardio. You talk about a guy whose amateur record is 33-0 with 30 knockouts. I mean, this guy's just a different breed. This is his 9th UFC fight. He's 8-0. He's got 11 pro wins by sub, 9 by knockout. I think Strickland's going to have his hands full in this fight. I mean, Strickland's wrestling hasn't been great. He's been known primarily as a stand-up boxer. I think Dricus is going to win this fight. I mean, I really like Strickland, but I just don't see this version of Dricus losing to Strickland.
So you mentioned there that Dricus has beaten Adesanya before. But Strickland has beaten Adesanya, so I mean the levels of that is there. Do you see? I remember that Adesanya fight, the Adesanya Strickland fight, like it was yesterday. It was one of the most boring fights I've ever seen in my entire life. Do you think Strickland employs any strategies he had from that fight into this one?
I don't know. I think that
on his feet, that is. I mean, that was a very much stand-up fight.
Yeah, that's what he did the first time they met, and like I said, I don't think Dricus won that fight. I think Strickland won that fight. I mean, it was close. It wasn't a robbery, but they're both coming off a win. Like the version of Strickland that just fought Paulo Costa last year, he looked really good. 5 rounds, just went after Costa, who's a killer. He's big. He probably should be in light heavyweight. Costa's big. He's long. He hits hard.
Pause. I said pause.
I know. I'm just saying, like he's got a big reach. You know what I mean? But I think Strickland's a really good fighter. I just don't see him beating this version of Dricus. That's got that wrestling. Because Strickland's wrestling has never been that good since he moved up to middleweight. Early Strickland was a welterweight and had okay wrestling and had a lot of wins by sub, but when he bulked up and realized his boxing was a lot better, he just trained striking. You talk about a guy who trains and he just strictly spars for 3 to 4 hours a day when he's in camp. He doesn't use a lot of kicks. He doesn't ever shoot for takedowns. I think Dricus is gonna wind up wrestling him, and I think he's gonna wind up winning another probably decision, but it's not gonna be a boring fight.
What are the odds at right now for this fight? Is Dracus the favorite?
Dracus is the favorite. Last time I checked, on was a plus 180 dog, so almost a 2-to-1 dog. I think Dracus came in at minus 215. But I think this is a fight I don't really want to bet on. I don't think it's good enough odds to bet Dracus because the payout's just not there.
Well, that's going to do it for the main card there. Before we let you go, Drew, I got one more question for you here. It doesn't have anything to do with this card in particular, but I had a good question. It's something that a lot of people have asked around the UFC world. And I want to know if you can explain for us the fall off of Israel Adesanya, because there was a time when he was the UFC's guy. Like, he was far and away the most marketable fighter that they had. They were very clearly had media attention around him for a reason. He said some really weird stuff. Don't ask him what he was doing with his dog. And, or, the cartoon, just moved past that, right? But he was a guy who, like, everyone loved to fight. Those Alex Pereira fights, some of the best fights people remember to this day. And then he fights Sean Strickland, and then he kind of just goes downhill from here. And even this past couple weekends before I got knocked out. Do you have anything that can explain what happened to him? Or why it happened
not really
in the UFC? Because we see it a lot. We just don't see it with him.
I'm not sure. That's one of the fascinating things about UFC is that you can be on top and you could be 20-0 like Izzy was, and then you go up and fight Jan Blachowicz go for double champ, you lose, and then you lose to Pereira, so there's 2 losses, but you win the next fight against Pereira. But I don't really think the Strickland fight was his undoing. I almost think it was honestly losing that fight coming up to light heavyweight and trying to go for double champ. I think going from 20 and beating everybody and then going up for double champ and losing, I think that kind of puts some doubt in you. But I mean, Izzy's still Izzy. You talk about aura in the UFC. I think that the aura around Adesanya is second only to McGregor. Izzy's been unbelievable, undoubtedly a Hall of Famer. But this version of Izzy, I just don't know where it really went wrong. I don't think it was the loss. You can't really say, oh, it was this moment in time where it kind of all just slipped away. But I think it was the loss to Jan Blachowicz, and then losing to Pereira. But you avenge the loss, and then you lose to Strickland and Nasser Dine. I mean, you talk about a guy who's 1-4 in his last 5 fights.
Yeah. Do you predict a comeback for him? Is that in the picture?
I don't know. That's hard to say. You're not in a position where if you win your next fight, you're going to get a rematch of the title. I mean, if Izzy beat Nasser Dine last weekend, he was looking at probably fighting the winner of this fight in a rematch. I don't know. I think that I wouldn't be surprised if he retires. He's getting older. He's had a hell of a career. But he could make another run at the belt, but the division's so young, I don't know. That's something that I really don't know if I have the answer to.
Well, Drew, thank you for providing your expertise for us today. This is going to be a staple on this show every time. I think we're going to keep it for the main UFCs. I don't think we're going to go into Fight Night or Ultimate Warrior or whatever else Dana White pulls out of his ass. But
Dana White's Contender Series, yeah.
Yeah, what else he's got? Dana White's going to show up on Joe Rogan one day and be like, "We're going to fight in space."
I would watch.
He's going to be sitting there like this. Anyway, Drew, thank you so much. And thank you for watching wherever you're joining us from. Once again, this is coming out on Saturday morning. Make sure you tune in to UFC 312 tonight, pay-per-view everywhere. But we all know how we're really watching this fight.
Yes, we do.
And that's going to be all, folks. So whether you're joining us on Spotify or YouTube, we thank you very much and have a good rest of your day.